Alright, this is a simple introductory video on how to buy a used revolver. A little background about myself. I have 30 years of firearms enthusiast experience behind me, a couple of years in law enforcement, graduated college, a degree in criminal justice. I've lectured in college regarding gun safety, hundreds of thousands of rounds fired, and never once had one negligent or accidental discharge. A lot of people who want to buy a revolver but don't have a lot of money will consider buying a used one. But the problem is that they lack confidence in a used gun. I mean, let's face it, you're not buying a used microwave oven. This is an inherently dangerous weapon. But there are some things that you can learn, and they're very simple actually, that will help you gain confidence and be able to spot the cherries from the lemons. It's not really difficult. When you go to look at revolvers, you'll need one of these, and you'll also need a feeler gauge. If you don't know what a feeler gauge is, bring along a friend who knows what one of those are. You can pick one up at the auto parts store. They're very easy to use. Most people, when they go in to look at a gun, they're handed the gun, and the first thing they do is they hold it like this, pointing the gun directly at the salesman. This just tells the salesman that you don't know what you're doing. Never point a gun at somebody, please. Next thing to do is open the cylinder and make sure that the gun is not loaded. If you handle the weapon correctly, by not pointing it at the salesman and checking to make sure the gun is not loaded, the salesman will automatically relax. They know that you have spent some time learning how to handle one of these things. First test, of course, was unload the gun. Always, always, always. Next, hold the gun up like this, turn on the light, and have a look down the barrel. What you will see is corkscrew-like rifling with valleys and hills, they're called. The rifling is what spins the bullet as it travels down the barrel. Is the rifling crisp? It should be. But if you see any rust, or if you see any pits in the barrel, ask to see a different revolver. You just don't want to have to deal with that because it's not good for accuracy. Another thing you want to look for along the tops of the rifling is a ring. A perfect ring going around the inside of the barrel along the tops of the rifling. If you see that, that means the gun was fired with a bullet stuck in the barrel, probably from a squib load. If you see that, ask to have the barrel replaced or ask to see another revolver, because it will ruin your accuracy. Next, run your fingers along the length of the barrel. Do you feel any bulges? If you do, it means the gun was fired with a bullet stuck in the barrel, but somehow the owners managed to get that ring off of the top of the rifling. Once again, if you feel that bulge, ask to have the barrel replaced or ask to see another revolver. Also, while you got it out, check the muzzle. Look for burrs, dings, and nicks. They will not hurt your accuracy or reliability if they're small, but you might talk with the salesman about coming down on the price a little bit because of that. Also, check the butt of the gun. See if it's been used as a hammer. If it has, you probably don't want to deal with the gun. But if you like it, maybe the salesman can come down a little bit on the price. Next, you'll want to check the stroke of the ejector rod. It should travel its full length and not bind. Also, check the extractor star. It should seat firmly and surely and not be bent. It should seat into the cylinder. Also check the small pins on the back of the extractor star. Are there any cracks in them? that you can see any chips, those pins are partially responsible for rotating the cylinder during firing. So if they're chipped or cracked, you're going to lose reliability or not have any. So if you see those are chipped or cracked, ask to have the part replaced or look at another revolver. Next, use the light and look through each of the 6 or 7 or 5 cylinders, however many you have. You will see some brown rings, of course, that's natural, that's a used gun, but you're looking for bulges. If you see any bulges, it means the gun was fired with ammunition that was too powerful for it. You'd be surprised how many times people screw that up. It'll be a gun chambered for, say, 357, and they'll put 357 plus P plus plus in it and wind up hurting the gun. Next, rotate the cylinder by hand. It should be smooth, it should not vibrate, and its axis should not go off. If it does, if anything, any vibration or if the axis goes off, that means the gun has excessive wear. Go ahead and find another gun. You don't need to deal with that. Next thing you want to do is examine the forcing cone. The forcing cone is the part of the gun where the bullet, during firing, enters the barrel. Do you see any cracks? Do you see any chips? There should be none of that. Forcing cones do crack on occasion. It's inherent. It just happens. There's an awful lot of stress there. And if you got a cracked forcing cone, your accuracy is gone. Absolutely gone. Next thing you want to check is the firing pin. The firing pin is what strikes the back of the cartridge, firing the cartridge. And to do that, you'll need to hold the gun up to the light or have some light behind it. You'll need to pull the trigger, let the hammer fall, even push on it, and look through the back of the cylinder, in between the cylinder and frame here, for adequate protrusion of the firing pin. The firing pin must protrude to strike the primer on the back of your cartridge. And then it should vanish when you release the trigger and hammer. If you do not have adequate protrusion, ask for a part to be replaced or look for a new pistol. Next, make sure that the cylinder and the crane open and lock surely. Try to get this cylinder to open without pressing the button to open. If it does, you probably have damage on the back of your extractor star locking pin, or perhaps down below at the lower locking pin, or perhaps a spring behind either one of those pins. Either way, you don't want that to happen. Next, you want to bring in your feeler gauge and check for the gap between the forcing cone and the face of the cylinder. If that gap is more than 0.01 inches, then the gun has excessive looseness. You should not have that much of a gap in your gun. If you do, ask to see another revolver. Next, examine the seam that runs between the frame and the crane. You should not have any gaps. And if you push on that cylinder to try and open it up, you should not have any gaps. Next, pull the hammer to full cock. Then, try to rotate the cylinder out of lockup. It should not rotate out of lockup. Go ahead and put that to about 20 pounds. If it does, then it's probably because the last owner cowboyed this gun. That is, and I'm sure you've seen it, somebody closes the cylinder and spins it, and you get that rapid clicking noise that we've all seen on Hollywood movies. That's very damaging to a gun. It wears out a pin down here that's responsible for locking that cylinder. Just because you see it on a Hollywood movie doesn't mean it's right. Don't do that. Another thing that you see people do is they'll close the gun by flipping rapidly the gun. This causes stress on a gun that you don't need. The proper way to do it is to close it and then index the cylinder. That is, you're getting it lined up. And you can do that either with this hand or with this hand. But don't flip the gun and don't cowboy it. Next, cock the hammer and try to get the hammer to fall without pulling the trigger. The hammer should not fall unless you pull that trigger. And you'd be surprised how many people go into their garage, tear apart the gun, and get a hand file and file down the hammer. They're trying to improve the quality of the trigger pull. And they screw it up because they don't know what they're doing. If that hammer falls when you don't pull the trigger, get it to the salesman right away. Let them know what happened. I've actually had that happen on a gun. And the people at Old West Firearms in Redding, California were really outstanding. They immediately replaced the hammer and did a detailed tear down of the entire revolver right in front of me. They looked at everything. Now, some revolvers will have two levels of cocking, half cock and full cock. If they have a half cock, test that out as well. Some guns have a safety, like this one. If they do have a safety, test it out. The most important safety is the one between your ears. But test this one out too. The final test is to gently bind the cylinder. You only need about 3 pounds, 4 pounds of pressure. And then pull the trigger in single action mode 6 times. And double action mode 6 times. What you're doing with that test is you're testing the integrity of the internal parts. There should be no problems. Always ask permission to dry fire any gun. Sometimes the salespeople will say no, and that's just something that you're going to have to consider. Please obey all firearms purchasing laws. Call your county sheriff because they usually know more about it than anybody else if you have any questions. Stay safe and have fun, and go out there and save some money and buy some cherries. Bye-bye. Hi guys, thanks for tuning in. Say after reviewing my last video, I realized there were a couple of things that I really should have touched on that I was too brief on. Want to expand on and let you know about. First thing, of course, is check to make sure that the gun is not loaded. Always, always, always. The next thing to check, or I want to expand on, are these little holes. Those are called cylinder stops. And there are a number of them, one for each of the cylinders. You want to inspect each one of these for damage. The edges running front to back should be flat, and you'll clearly see that it's been gouged out by machining. That recessed hole will be filled by a pin down here on the bottom of the frame. That's what stops the cylinder from rotating. You'll want to gently bind the cylinder, and what you're checking for here is to make sure the timing is correct. That is, you're making sure that the cylinder stops and is locked before the hammer falls. Revolvers are under a lot of stress, and they will occasionally go out of timing. You can watch carefully with each pull of the trigger for each of the cylinders to find out whether or not your timing is on. It's really not that difficult. You just need to pay attention. I had also mentioned about spinning and checking for vibrations. You also want to check for forward and backward motion. There should be none. When the cylinder is open, there will be a little clicking. But once it's closed and indexed, there should be no forward and backward motion. And you'll want to check that on all 6 of the cylinders. Another thing I said to check for was bulging in the cylinders as well as the barrel. Also check for cracks. If it's cracked, get a different gun. Just hand it back to the salesman and let him know that the gun is not safe. Something else I asked you to check was the gap between the cylinder face and the forcing cone, and that it should not be anything more than 0.01 inches. Guys, that was just a general rule of thumb. You want to use your feeler gauges to find the minimum and the maximum and contact the manufacturer and get the specifications if you have questions about the true specifics of what the proper gap should be. 0.01 inches was just a general rule of thumb. Another thing you want to check is the rear sights. If they are set off to one side substantially, you might have an alignment issue with your barrel. And actually, that's a pretty easy one to spot. Now, on my last video, you saw me where I was telling you about trying to get the hammer to fall without pulling the trigger, and I did this. Guys, this is thick shag carpeting that's laid over carpet padding and 2 towels down. It's not going to hurt the gun. But don't do it on a glass top counter. Don't do it in front of the salesman like that. But you can take the gun and tap it, trying to get that hammer to fall without pulling the trigger. Another thing that you should check are the 2 shields around the cylinder here to the back of the cylinder. Those are called recoil shields. And one thing that you can tell if the gun has been beaten up or cowboyed or not is people will put ammo in here, then they'll slam the crane closed and spin it. But when they do that, a lot of times the brass will come out, it'll back out, and it'll strike this face of the recoil shield. If you see that, it's a good indicator that somebody abused the gun. Another thing to take a look at are the screw slots. Most guns have several. If a professional were to disassemble this gun, replace or work on or lubricate or clean any of the internals, they are going to use the correct tools, and those screw slots will not be damaged. Somebody who is a garage mechanic probably won't care and damage those screw slots. Take a look at them. It's not proof positive that the gun has been abused, but it does serve as an indicator that somebody who didn't know what they were doing may have very well gone in there and tampered with the innards. Now, there's one other thing I want to touch on that really doesn't have anything to do with the mechanics of a revolver, and I get an awful lot of questions about accuracy, shooting. There's so much that goes into it that I couldn't tell you everything, not in the 15-minute time limit I have on these videos. But I can give you a couple of things. 2 things. First is the grip. Keep your thumbs down, keep your finger down, never do this. It's a real temptation of people to do this. But if you do, the hot gases escaping from the gun will burn the tip of your finger, and the tip of your finger is pretty darn sensitive. So practice gripping correctly with your finger down like this. And it is going to take practice. You've got to practice doing this because it's instinctive for some people to do this or to do this. Either way on a revolver is bad, 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 because you're going to flinch when your finger gets burned. The second thing I want to tell you about is meant to help with accuracy, and it's about trigger pull, trigger management. When you're holding the weapon and you're going to pull the trigger, most people have a pull arc that looks like this. I'm just generally exaggerating, but it does get the point across. That's not the way to do it. You want your pull to be like that. There will be some resistance from the trigger on your finger, but you can see the difference in motion. Try it with your own revolver, make sure it's not loaded, and make sure you have snap caps, and you'll see the difference immediately. It makes a huge difference. That's it. Thanks for your questions. Thanks for your comments. They're much appreciated. Stay safe, and please obey all firearms purchasing laws. Bye-bye.